And we're live. Hi everyone, thanks for joining our STEM Women Hangout. As you can see, Professor Emma Johnson is not here with us today. We've had some glitchy tech issues, but we have Bella Counihan with us instead as well. And my co-host is Zuleyka, and we'll have this discussion as we planned about the representation of women scientists in Wikipedia. So Bella is the media officer for the Australian Academy of Science, and she has a background in journalism and communications in education. And she's also an editor for The Conversation, which is a really great online publication with lots of interesting articles about all sorts of topics. So, Bella, first question. So the Australian Academy of Science held an event called the Wikibomb, and the purpose of the Wikibomb was to increase the number of Wikipedia entries about Australian women in STEM. Can you tell us why the Academy chose to coordinate this project centered on women on Wikipedia?
So we were really, with the Wikibomb, we were trying to boost the online profile of Australian women scientists. And we were partly inspired by a similar initiative that was run in the UK with the Royal Society, which is sort of the Academy's counterpart over there. And really, the whole idea of it was to just see that there was a few glaring gaps, I guess, in terms of the information out there online. And we really thought, since Wikipedia is such a go-to resource, and it's actually, the sixth, I think, most popular website, online generally, that really that's such a good place to start. And because of the Wikipedia sort of ethos of anyone being able to join and edit pages, we really thought that was a really good place to start, and particularly in terms of presenting information for the next generation. So, if you imagine you're a Year 10 student, you're doing a project around Australian science, where are you going to look? Wikipedia would be pretty much, after maybe Googling, would be one of the top spots that you go to. So we really wanted to improve the information out there and to hopefully just inspire by telling the stories of Australian women scientists.
And what were some of the highlights, and what sort of reception did you get for when you did it? How did people respond?
Yeah, we got a fantastic reception. It was really heartening because I think initially we really didn't know. This was the first event of its kind in Australia, and we weren't really sure how much interest there would be. But look, we really had some great coverage in mainstream media. I mean, Fairfax Press, and also on Radio National. So it seemed to really resonate with a lot of people. And I mean, social media as well. There was a really good response. I think over the 4 days that we were sort of really trying to ramp up social media, we ended up reaching 70,000 Twitter accounts through the two hashtags we were using, which was really good. And in fact, one of the highlights for me was someone responding on social media and after the event and saying, and he was a guy and he had 2 young daughters, and he'd become an editor for the first time that day. And he was just so excited to tell his daughters about what he'd done and why he was doing it, and to hopefully try and tell them about the women scientists that are out there contributing so much to science, but to society more generally. So that was a really nice moment.
Yeah, those stories make it all worth it.
Exactly.
So Bella, there's data by the Wikipedia Foundation that's showing that 90% of Wikipedia's editors are actually men, and they're mostly living in affluent English-speaking majority countries. This reflects in a lack of diversity on science pages, obviously. Research also shows that individuals refrain from contributing to Wikipedia thinking that it takes too much time and that maybe they lack the technical skills. What's the significance of having women scientists involved in editing wiki pages on other women scientists? And did you generally find that people were easily able to learn how to edit pages on a day?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. We weren't sure how that was going to go either, actually, in terms of getting people to learn how to edit Wikipedia pages, because there's such a diversity of skills out there, and some people have more experience than others. But look, I think everyone got to a point where they could create a page, and that was really exciting. I think we tried as much as possible to provide support and especially for the people that we had at our physical event in Canberra at the Shine Dome, we had people on staff there to help guide them through sort of step by step, and it was really, I think that was one of the really important takeaway points of the day was actually, people just need a little bit of guidance to learn how to edit Wikipedia and a bit of information about just how to go through that process, and that will address that serious gender imbalance. I mean, when I found out that only 10% of editors of Wikipedia are women, it was shocking that imbalance. And I think you've got to say that with such a skewed editor demographic, that inevitably must affect the choices in terms of what pages are created, in terms of what bits of information are most important. And it's sort of it reminds me a little bit of maybe even journalism, once upon a time, that the vast majority of journalists were men, and I think in that you had a skewed representation of the issues in society. And because Wikipedia is essentially these days the historical record for most people, that really skews things. So it was really great to see people find the confidence to edit Wikipedia and hopefully take that forward and continue to do that.
Yeah.
I noticed that you guys also linked all your pages under the tab Women Scientists in Australia, which was really great to see, because then that sort of lists all the pages that are available. And to anyone watching, you can also see what's already been done and have some ideas about who to write about if you want to get involved as well.
Yep, absolutely. Look, there was some. It was really nice to just have that catalogue, and we made sure that they were added to the Australian Women Sciences page, but also just the Australian Sciences page, because once again, that's where maybe if you're the student looking for information, you might go there first, have a scan through, and then try and find a page or a person you want to profile for a school project. So it was really great to have that all there and provide more information for the general public, but also for students especially.
Yeah, Wikipedia is the starting point for many a student essay. So
exactly, it shouldn't be everything, but citing Wikipedia, I'm sure most teachers would frown on that. My partner is a science teacher, and I don't think he would accept too much in the way of citations from Wikipedia, but it's a very good place to start.
It's a starting point, yeah, and it's good if when people start, they know that, hey, look, there's women scientists in there as well, because if the women aren't mentioned at the starting point, then they won't show up at all in the narrative, so that's a problem. So you mentioned that how the Royal Society has done this sort of event before. You guys did it. What sort of tips can you give to other organizations that are looking to host similar events?
Yeah, we learned so much, and I learned so much in the process about how Wikipedia works, and some of it is straightforward, and some of it is actually more complicated than you might realize. I think one of the first things that was really valuable, and I would highly recommend, is having a spokesperson or having a champion for the event. And Emma Johnston, who unfortunately couldn't join us this morning, or hopefully will soon. She was invaluable in terms of getting the word out there, really just being a champion. She really believed in the event as well, just thought it was just an exciting new thing, and that passion really came across, and it really resonated with other people, and it just meant that we had the support going in, and we had the media story, which is nice as well. So I think that would definitely be one thing that I would recommend if you can. Find yourself an Emma Johnston. But but the other thing to realize is very early on, try and contact someone who has experience within Wikipedia or has some knowledge about Wikipedia. We're very lucky to have some involvement with Wikimedia Australia, who were really just invaluable in terms of their advice, how to go about things, and especially, as the registrations climbed up and up, and we were like, suddenly we have 140 people registered around the country, satellite events in Melbourne and Sydney and elsewhere.
Mm-hmm.
The organizational task of getting all those people to understand how to use Wikipedia, having that advice early on about how to do that was really good. So, and with that, I would also say just provide as much support as you can to those people, especially if you have people remotely. I think having an ability to have them ask questions and for you to respond in a timely way, that was really important. We tried to do that through Twitter mainly, but we also had a forum for people to go to, and I think I hope that really helped people out there.
And did you also find it helpful to have that journalism coverage to kind of get the snowball effect, if you will, for that sort of event?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, my background is media, so any involvement from media, I think, is a positive. And we had, Well Today covered it. We had, a really nice feature in the Sydney Morning Herald, which was largely about Dora Lush, who's an amazing women scientist. I'd highly recommend people go and look at her story because it's a great one. So I think having that media interest really boosted the profile of the event, which meant we got more registrations and meant we got more pages created in the end.
I mean, you've just noted, your journalism background, and this event was obviously very successful. And there is something to be said about getting the media interested in telling diverse stories and featuring women, in newspapers, because men are regularly featured, male scientists. So, making science more diverse means having more scientists recognised for the public work they do, and women in particular. So given your journalism background, what things do you think we should be doing in order to help tell more diverse stories about women scientists in Australia and elsewhere?
Yeah, I think this is such a fundamental point. There's I guess the main thing is to find those stories. So people within science communication, but also women scientists themselves. I think it's just a matter of telling really good stories. And there's so much to a good story, but quite often I think from in this area, what's really nice is telling the personal stories around the contributions, because it's sort of one thing to talk about just the research, which is obviously really important, but it's also the journey to get there. How people got to know what we know, I think, is really fascinating, and I think quite often science remains somewhat hidden from the public view because we haven't got enough of those stories, and particularly sort of women scientists within that. So really what we need to start doing more and more is telling the human and personal difficulties that come with being a scientist and getting getting to that moment of groundbreaking research. So yeah, I would say that's the way to go, and for women scientists really to try and put themselves out there as much as possible. I know it's very difficult when you're a woman scientist. You've got so much on your plate in terms of the research itself just on its own, but there's sort of I guess these days really just that need to be a public advocate as well on your own behalf and the community of science on its behalf, but also just on behalf of your research, to get your research out there.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we always remember the personal stories about science. There's even historically, Alexander Fleming finding penicillin, that was an accident, and we remember, it was an accident that made it happen. it's always the personal stories or the struggle that makes it relatable, and also makes the science more realistic, because otherwise people think that groundbreaking discoveries happen every day, whereas no, it's only maybe 1% of the time, and the 99% of the time it's just failure, and you're like, oh great, this experiment didn't work. And I think it's important to share how science works in real life, and not in a, fairy tale world where everything works first time.
Absolutely, and for example, the other great example I think that resonates with a lot of people is the story about Barry Marshall and the self-experimentation that went on there to try and prove that ulcers were not stress related, as they've commonly been thought to be within the medical community. So that's just a fantastic story. That's someone also that might appeal to an Australian ethos, which is about standing up to being the larrikin, being the person sort of outside the mainstream, and saying, but having the evidence and having, a really good idea that was actually, so important in terms of how we treat ulcers now. So the story of that, the fact that he, self-experimented and then, stuck it to the medical community at the time, it's a great story.
Yeah, I mean, science literally gave him an ulcer, so.
Yeah, exactly. But only by swallowing the bacteria, not by stress.
It wasn't stress.
Yeah.
So can you tell us about other programs and events at the Academy of Science that you guys run to elevate women's participation in science? For example, awards, support for early career researchers, training on science communication. You just mentioned, it's good for women to put themselves out there. Do you train them how to do that and things like that?
Yeah, so I mean, the Academy, I think, is very, very conscious of trying to improve, the gender inequity issues within science. And, we know, for example, that 17% of all senior level positions in the natural and physical sciences are held by women. So it's it's such a small percentage of the senior roles within institutions are held by women, and I think that is something that we're certainly conscious of. And yes, we try in lots of ways to try and address those issues through our early to mid career research forum, which regularly sort of looks at gender inequity issues. We have awards, so Emma, in fact, is the Nancy Millis, the very first Nancy Millis Award winner, and and that was specifically to recognize leadership by women in science, which is, we don't recognize that probably often enough. But one of the really exciting things that we've been looking at recently is what we're calling our SAGE Forum, which is Science Australia Gender Equity Forum, and that's led by Brian Schmidt and Alini Joshi, who are quite high-profile scientists in Australia. And the idea really is to look at an institutional level the gender inequity issues. We're looking particularly at there's a thing called the Athena SWAN Charter, which was in the UK, which is your listeners might be familiar with, but the idea basically is to require research organisations to really identify the gender issues that they have and try and tailor some action towards addressing them. And even in the UK, it's actually conditional upon funding. So, we're trying to bring together, and we have a workshop coming up in late November, all about trying to get the Australian Research Council, the major group of 8 universities. We're trying to get them together to say, how can we do something similar in Australia? So I think that's really important, because that looks at it at that institutional level, which is so key.
Yeah, and Athena SWAN, I mean, it's getting a lot more popular here in the UK, and you often see it on university websites when you go to the homepage. We are the proud, we have an Athena SWAN award, and there's 3 types of awards. There's gold, silver, bronze, and there's not many of them, and it's almost turned into like a competition between the universities to try and fight for it. So I think that would be great if you guys can have that sort of peer pressure to do better in Australia as well.
Yeah, I think competition is a powerful driver, and if you make a public statement about the quality of an institution's gender equity standing, I think that really they pay attention to that because it'll make a difference for their public image and their reputation, and that's just so important. So we are, it may not be exactly like the Athena SWAN Charter. It's just something that, one of the models we're looking at, but it's certainly been, as far as I understand, very successful. So if we can, push that, drive something that could work for an Australian context, I think that would be really, really great.
Mm. So looking a bit more broadly at Australian science today, we're facing a pretty tough budget and there's a lot of policy challenges. And on top of this, as we've been talking about, there's not as many women scientists who are visible to the public. Is social media the best way to bridge a gap on gender inclusion and public engagement, or can you see other ways to help women contribute to public science?
I just think use whatever you've got. I think it's so important for women scientists to be out there at any level, and that includes public events, old-fashioned, just going to a public event and talking with the public. But yes, social media, traditional media. I think increasingly you sort of have to be your own advocate within science, and that may not be how things have been previously done, or maybe not even necessarily the best way. But I think in this time where increasingly science is very budget constrained, you need to show the value to the public of science, and without that you can't really have the political will, and the future of science generally probably rests probably too much on political will, but it's the reality of where things are. So I think reaching out through the media, through social media, just any public opportunity where you get to connect your research to what it means to people. It just needs to be done as much as you can. Even if you're in the lab and it's a long day, but sending out the occasional tweet, I think, is is going to help.
Yeah, and I think, as you were saying before about telling engaging stories, I think I can see how if you look at a blog sort of like a ongoing testament of how you do your research rather than waiting until you've got the finished piece, I can see how that might fit into what you're saying, because I think too often, we do wait until the end of a project, and I've actually seen science communication people and journalists telling scientists, don't wait until the end, don't wait until something's published. Reach out to us before you actually publish, because that can sort of be too late in terms of a 24-hour news cycle.
Yeah, and the media these days is so crowded. I mean, there is more and more players. So even in Australia, I'm thinking in the last couple of years, there's been such a rise in online sites. We have The Guardian, we have The Conversation, the Daily Mail has now got an Australian brand. And even I think BuzzFeed. There's just a huge proliferation of sources. So yeah, I just think the more that you can reach out to those different mediums, I think, is great, and reach out early. I mean, this is the thing, is so many of the stories that you might hear that really have a big hit, and they sort of maybe a research story that goes to the radio and is also in the print, and it has a wide reach. Usually that will have been dropped under embargo to journalists maybe at least a few days ahead of when you actually want to announce it. You want to try and do as many pre-recorded sessions as possible, because that increases the likelihood of you getting play on the day. I mean, you never know media is, as you say, the 24-hour cycle. It moves very, very quickly, but basically trying to get as many spots as you can across the board is the best way to do it. And you're so right. The earlier, the better, really. Yeah, because then you can really target the audience you want to target as well.
Hmm.
Yeah. I mean, if I were to play devil's advocate with that, if you go too early, you risk the danger of being scooped by a rival research group or something like that. So, I think that's something many researchers worry about, and especially researchers that are in the field of drug development and things like that. They might have patents that are pending that they absolutely cannot talk about because of their ties to industry. So, I think it's important if there was a way to accommodate all those people and all their circumstances, so that, you know, the goal is to get science out without hurting other people in the process, and I think that's important.
Yeah, and that is certainly a reality that maybe is more important in the scientific world than many other worlds. But even if you can, even if it's a couple of days earlier, like, so say, you know, you're going to release something on the Monday, so you try and contact people on the Friday. It doesn't have to be a huge lead time. It just needs to be enough to be able to provide as much information to the journalists involved. Journalists these days are just, and I know, having been one, are just completely flat chat. It's incredible. Newsrooms have shrunk to the point of getting to skeleton staff. So any lead time that you can give a journalist is just invaluable. And if the timing doesn't work out, you know, that may be, but at least there was, you know, at least you had a go and tried to get there. But I mean, the thing as well is to try and find the journalists that you trust, the ones that you think will keep your embargoes. You know, I think that's really important as well. But try and develop those relationships, because they will really, you know, they will really change things for you in terms of how your research is received and reported.
Yeah, it's beneficial for both people, both sides, the journalist and the researcher, to nurture that relationship.
Absolutely, yeah. And I mean, unfortunately, there aren't as many specific science roundsmen as there once was. In fact, there's very few in Australia these days, but there are still people who, you know, might look after environment, or they might look after specifically technology, or even, you know, I think science should maybe reach out more to business journalists who often, you know, the research may have a business implication that's important. And people in business as well, they're looking to the future, so they're always looking for what's next and how to improve things. So, you know, I think there's a lot of sources which you can try for, depending on what kind of research you do, obviously.
Yeah. So, how do you think we can better promote women's scientific contribution to the general public?
Yeah, well, I guess in most of the things I've been saying, really, try and get your voice out there. Try and tell your story. Understand what your story is. So that's a really tricky question for a lot of people, because they're in a you know, a wood for the trees scenario. They're so engrossed in what they've done. But I mean, if you just think about how you tend to talk about your research when you're just at a social gathering, so someone says, "What do you do?" and you say, "Oh, I do this, this, and this." That tends to be the most important points, because you're in this social situation, so you don't want to bore someone, so you end up telling them a quick story about what is your research and what do you do and what does it mean. And those are the key points that you're trying to get across in anything. You know, what does it mean? Why is your research important? So I think trying to understand how to tell that story is really important. And befriend your science communicators. Find people that within your university or you know, elsewhere, and ask them for tips and tricks on how to present your research. And I'm sure that, you know, people will help where they can. So yeah, just trying to tell those stories better, and try and give it that human dimension.
It's interesting, the other day I was reading about your first point about telling a snappy story, like your social story, and it was written by scientists for science audience, and they were saying that we don't have good elevator pitches, that most scientists get really caught up in the details, and so they were encouraging all scientists to have no more than 2 minutes where you basically summarize not the ins and outs, but the social story, as you're saying. You know, you're in that elevator, how are you going to tell your story and keep someone interested?
Absolutely. Look, I couldn't have said it better. The elevator pitch. It's much harder than you think. It doesn't. It's funny because you think not that much work could go into 2 minutes, but actually trying to find the essence of what you do and why you do it. And turn it into a 2-minute thing, I think is just, it's actually really challenging, and especially as you say, if you're so focused on the ins and outs and the detail that, and because you have to be, you're a scientist, you need to be details oriented. But I think the more that we can teach early career researchers especially how to do that is just going to help them so much in terms of the rest of their careers. So, and you know, I think, like, for example, the 3-minute thesis competition is a great example of people learning the performance and the communication of their research. And those 3-minute thesis videos get a lot of views. People really are fascinated by what research is going on. It's just that it's often too dense for them to really understand. So I think that helps both the general public to understand what kind of research is happening in Australian research institutions, and also the training for scientists and researchers to say, okay, I've got 3 minutes. I can't go into the ins and outs of everything. I need to distill it. So that kind of valuable public performance, really, I think it's so important these days.
Mm. Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Bella. Did you want to add anything else before we wrap up?
No, look, I think thank you very much for having me, and I guess especially I think if people are interested in how the SAGE forum is going, that they can go to the Academy website and look at SAGE and see the kind of work that is beginning to happen. So if people are interested also to learn more about the media side of things, what the Academy's been saying lately, there's information there, and on the EMCR forum website as well. So for early career researchers needing more support, there's that forum available too.
Thanks. We'll link to the Academy and the sites you just mentioned on our blog. So thanks again, Bella. And before signing off, we'll just remind our viewers that next week we're speaking with neuroscience researcher Rian Egnor, who studies the neural basis of natural animal behaviour at the Howard Hughes Medical Institute. So thanks again for joining us, and have a great couple of weeks.
Great.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.